The decision that changed everything. 15 years ago, on a brisk autumn afternoon, Pastor Jonathan Green sat in his modest church office, the sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows casting colorful patterns on the walls. The room was quiet except for the gentle rustling of the pages of an old Bible he had been studying. Yet, his mind wasn't on the scriptures today. It was heavy with the recent loss of two of his dearest friends, Marcus and Amelia Carter, a devoted couple from his congregation. Marcus and Amelia were not just parishioners. They were family in every sense but blood. Their laughter and warmth had filled the small church for years, and their 7 young daughters had been like nieces to Jonathan. He often joked that his life as a bachelor pastor was richer because he got to spoil those girls without the responsibility of parenthood. But now, the laughter was gone, and the sanctuary of their home had been reduced to silence. The accident had been swift and cruel. A patch of black ice on a dark highway had claimed the lives of both Marcus and Amelia. They left behind 7 young daughters. Tamara, the responsible 13-year-old. Jasmine, the dreamer at 11. Naomi, the bookworm at 9. Twins Maya and Mia, 7 and inseparable. Layla, the shy 5-year-old. And tiny Alana, just 3 years old and still clinging to her mother's skirts in memory. Jonathan had visited the girls the day after the tragedy, meeting them in a temporary foster care facility. Their tear-streaked faces and the terror in their eyes haunted him. They didn't understand the permanence of what had happened. They only knew that their parents were gone, and everything familiar was slipping away. The heart-wrenching meeting. The meeting with the social worker that followed was etched into Jonathan's memory. Seated at a long, cold table in the town hall, the woman had carefully explained the state's plan. "Pastor Green, we're trying our best, but finding a family for 7 children is nearly impossible. The girls will have to be split into different foster homes. We'll do everything we can to place them in loving environments." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Jonathan's mind raced with images of the girls being torn apart, Tamara without her younger sisters to look after, Jasmine's quiet sobs in a stranger's home, Alana losing even the faintest memory of her family. Is there no way to keep them together? Jonathan's voice cracked as he spoke. The social worker's expression softened, but she shook her head. "We've explored every option. There are simply no families equipped to take all 7. Jonathan sat in silence for a moment. 7. 7 girls who had just lost everything. 7 hearts that needed stability and love. The thought of their world shattering further made his chest tighten. "And if no one takes them?" he asked quietly. "They'll enter the system. We'll do our best to keep them connected, but—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Jonathan clenched his fists under the table, his heart pounding. He had always been a man of faith, leaning on God's guidance in his toughest moments. But this was a mountain he didn't know how to climb. He left the meeting with a heaviness he hadn't felt in years. A prayer and a revelation. That night, Jonathan knelt by his bed, the moonlight streaming through the window illuminating his weathered face. He prayed for hours, asking God for wisdom, for strength, and for a sign. His mind kept circling back to the faces of those 7 girls, their tearful eyes pleading for something he wasn't sure he could give. In the quiet stillness of the night, a thought began to take shape. It started as a whisper, a flicker of an idea so absurd that he shook his head in disbelief. "Adopt them all." "Impossible," he muttered aloud. "I'm just one man. I run a small church. I don't have the resources." Yet the thought persisted. He remembered the words Marcus had spoken to him many times before. "Family is everything, Pastor. No matter what happens, we stick together." Jonathan could almost hear Marcus's voice in his ear, urging him forward. By morning, the whisper had grown into a resolve. He knew it was an unconventional choice, one that would be met with skepticism and judgment. But his faith told him that love had no limits and family wasn't defined by biology. If no one else would take in those girls, he would. Facing the doubters, Jonathan wasted no time. That morning, He drove straight to the Child Services office. As he walked in, clutching his Bible for strength, he felt the eyes of the staff on him. Mrs. Carter, the head of the department, raised an eyebrow as he approached her desk. "Pastor Green," she greeted him. "How can I help you?" Jonathan took a deep breath. "I want to adopt Marcus and Amelia's daughters, all of them." The room fell silent. Mrs. Carter's pen froze midair, and she stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "All 7?" she asked incredulously. "Pastor, that's a monumental task. Have you really thought this through?" "I've prayed on it," he replied firmly. "These girls need each other. They've already lost their parents. Splitting them up would be another loss they shouldn't have to endure." Mrs. Carter sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Pastor, I don't doubt your heart, but this isn't just about love. Raising 7 children is a financial, emotional, and logistical challenge. Are you prepared for that?" Jonathan nodded. "I've run the numbers. I can make it work. I'll take extra jobs if I have to. And I have my congregation to lean on for support. These girls deserve to stay together." For the next hour, he laid out his case. He spoke about his connection to the family, his plans to renovate his home to accommodate the girls, and his commitment to giving them the life their parents would have wanted. By the end, Mrs. Carter's expression had softened, though her skepticism remained. "I'll be honest, Pastor," she said. "This is highly unusual, but I can see you're serious. We'll start the process, but it will take time. There are background checks, home visits, financial evaluations, and there's no guarantee the court will approve." "I'll do whatever it takes," Jonathan said, his voice unwavering. The road to approval. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Jonathan poured every ounce of energy into preparing for the girls. He converted his small study into a bedroom, painted walls in cheerful colors, and scoured thrift stores for bunk beds and children's clothes. His congregation rallied behind him, donating toys, bedding, and even their time to help transform his home. The girls, still staying in temporary care, began to visit on weekends. At first, they were wary, their grief casting a shadow over every interaction. But slowly, with Jonathan's gentle encouragement, they began to open up. Tamara started helping him in the kitchen, teaching her younger sisters how to make pancakes on Saturday mornings. Jasmine found solace in the church garden, planting flowers in memory of her mother. Even little Alana, who rarely spoke, began to giggle when Jonathan played peekaboo with her. A glimpse of hope. One Sunday afternoon, as the girls sat around the dining table coloring pictures, Jonathan watched them with a mixture of awe and fear. Could he really do this? Could he fill the void left by their parents? The weight of responsibility loomed large, but so did the love growing in his heart. Tamara looked up from her drawing and smiled at him. "Pastor Jonathan," she said softly, "Mom and Dad always said you were like family. I think they'd be happy we're here." Her words brought tears to his eyes. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about what he could give to the girls. It was also about what they were giving to him. A sense of purpose, a chance to honor his friend's legacy, and the beginnings of a family he hadn't known he needed. The journey was far from over. The court hearing still loomed, and there were many hurdles to clear. But as Jonathan knelt by his bed that night, he felt a peace he hadn't known in weeks. He whispered a prayer of gratitude, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, he was exactly where he was meant to be. The trials of a new beginning. The sound of laughter echoed through the modest house as Pastor Jonathan Green watched from the kitchen doorway. Tamara was teaching her younger sisters a hand-clapping game, their rhythmic giggles filling the room. It had only been a week since the girls had officially moved in, but the house already felt alive in ways Jonathan could never have imagined. Yet behind the laughter was the weight of the enormous responsibility he had taken on, and the doubts that came with it, adjusting to the new normal. The first few days were a whirlwind. Jonathan quickly realized that caring for 7 girls was nothing like leading a congregation. The girls were adjusting to their new reality, but grief clung to them like a shadow. Tamara, at 13, tried to act as the glue that held her younger sisters together, but even her resilience showed cracks. Jonathan would often find her sitting quietly by herself, clutching a photo of her parents. Jasmine, the 11-year-old dreamer, had taken to writing letters to her parents. She'd leave them on the windowsill at night, convinced they'd somehow find their way to heaven. Jonathan decided not to interfere. It was her way of coping. Naomi, the bookworm at 9, buried herself in stories, often retreating to a corner with a book too big for her small hands. The twins, Maya and Mia, were the mischievous duo. Their laughter was infectious, but it often masked the unease they felt in their new surroundings. Layla, just 5, rarely spoke and often clung to Tamara or Jonathan. And little Alana, the 3-year-old, spent her days wandering the house clutching a tattered blanket that had belonged to her mother. Jonathan's days became a careful balance of meeting each girl's individual needs while managing the chaos of a household with 7 children. Mornings were a blur of making breakfast, combing hair, and finding lost shoes. Evenings were filled with homework, bedtime stories, and soothing nightmares. The first challenge. One evening, as Jonathan was finishing the dishes, he heard a loud crash from the living room. Rushing in, he found the twins standing amid a sea of broken glass. One of the few decorations that had survived his bachelor days, a ceramic vase, was shattered on the floor. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she clutched Mia's hand. "We didn't mean to," she stammered. "We were just playing tag." Jonathan knelt down, his heart aching at the sight of their guilt-ridden faces. "It's okay," he said gently, brushing shards of ceramic into a dustpan. "Accidents happen." But Mia burst into tears, her tiny fists clenched. "Mom wouldn't have let us break it. She would have been so mad." Jonathan froze, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't their mother or father. He couldn't replace the love and discipline Marcus and Amelia had provided. Instead, he pulled the twins into a hug, whispering, "You're not in trouble. I'm here for you, okay? No matter what." That night, as he tucked them into bed, he realized that the vase wasn't the only thing that needed piecing back together. The girl's sense of security had been shattered, and it was up to him to rebuild it. Whispers in the congregation. While Jonathan focused on the girls, whispers began to spread through the small town. Some members of his congregation questioned his decision to adopt all 7 girls. The Sunday after the adoption was finalized, the church was buzzing with gossip. Mrs. Agnes Willow, an older woman who had attended the church for decades, approached Jonathan after the service. "Pastor," she began, her tone a mixture of concern and judgment, "we're all worried about you. This is such a burden. Are you sure you can handle it?" Jonathan smiled, masking the weariness he felt. "With God's help and the support of our community, I believe I can." But not everyone was so supportive. One evening, as Jonathan led Bible study, he overheard 2 men from the congregation whispering at the back of the room. "He's biting off more than he can chew," one said. "What kind of life can he give those girls?" Jonathan's chest tightened. He had expected doubts, but hearing them spoken aloud cut deep. Later that night, as he prayed before bed, he found himself asking God for strength. "I know I can't do this alone," he whispered. "Help me prove them wrong. For the girls' sake." A community divided. Despite the skeptics, many rallied around Jonathan and the girls. Mrs. Sarah Kemp, the church secretary, organized a donation drive to help furnish the house. Congregants brought over clothes, toys, and even groceries. One family donated a swing set, which Jonathan and a few volunteers spent an entire Saturday assembling in the backyard. When the girls saw it, their faces lit up with pure joy. For the first time since their parents' passing, Jonathan heard unbridled laughter as they raced to try it out. He stood watching, a lump in his throat, knowing these moments of happiness were worth every sacrifice. But the challenges didn't end there. With 7 growing children, expenses piled up quickly. Jonathan took on a part-time job at a local bookstore to supplement his income. Nights grew shorter as he balanced his pastoral duties, the part-time job, and parenting. The unexpected bond. One evening, as Jonathan sat in the living room sorting through bills, Jasmine approached him with a notebook clutched to her chest. "Pastor Jonathan," she said hesitantly, "can I read you something?" "Of course," he said, setting aside the papers. She opened the notebook and began to read a story she had written. A tale about a family of birds who lost their nest in a storm but found a new home with the help of a kind tree. As she read, her voice trembled, but her eyes lit up with pride. When she finished, Jonathan clapped softly. "That was beautiful, Jasmine. You have a real gift for writing." She blushed, her face lighting up with a shy smile. "Do you really think so?" "I do," he said earnestly, "and I think your mom and dad would be so proud of you." Jasmine's smile faltered, and she looked down at her notebook. "I miss them," she whispered. Jonathan reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know, sweetheart, and it's okay to miss them, but they're always with you, in your heart, and in everything you do." Jasmine nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. That night, she left the notebook on his desk with a note. "Thank you for believing in me." Building a new foundation. As the weeks turned into months, the house began to feel like a home. The girls developed routines, and while there were still moments of grief, laughter began to outweigh tears. Tamara took on a leadership role among her sisters, helping Jonathan with chores and keeping the younger ones in line. Naomi, the bookworm, started reading bedtime stories to Alana and Layla. The twins turned the backyard into their personal adventure zone, their playful antics filling the air with joy. Jonathan, for his part, grew into his role as a father figure. He learned to braid hair, pack lunches, and mediate squabbles over toys. He found unexpected joy in the chaos, from impromptu dance parties in the living room to quiet moments helping with homework at the kitchen table. One evening, as they all gathered around the dining table for dinner, Jonathan looked at the 7 faces before him and felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known was possible. This wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the one God had given him, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. The trials were far from over, but for the first time, Jonathan felt like they were truly a family. And as he tucked each girl into bed that night, he whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. The road ahead would be long, but together, they could face anything. A family in progress. As the weeks rolled into months, Pastor Jonathan Green's home transformed from a quiet retreat into a whirlwind of noise, laughter, and, at times, chaos. The adjustment wasn't seamless. Far from it. But every struggle seemed to build a stronger bond between Jonathan and the girls. Slowly, the cracks left by their devastating loss began to mend, though some wounds still ran deep. Growing pains. Jonathan quickly realized that raising 7 girls required more than just love and patience. It demanded adaptability and understanding. Each girl had her own personality, her own needs, and her own way of dealing with the trauma they had endured. Tamara, at 13, took on a motherly role. She insisted on helping Jonathan with the younger girls, often waking up early to pack their lunches or staying up late to fold laundry. One evening, Jonathan found her in the kitchen, her face tight with concentration as she worked on a chore. "You don't have to do everything, Tamara," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "I'm the oldest," she said simply. "It's my job now." Jonathan crouched down so they were eye level. "It's okay to lean on me too," he said softly. "You're still a kid, Tamara. You don't have to carry this alone." For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but instead, she nodded and gave him a small smile. "Okay," she whispered. Jasmine, on the other hand, struggled with her emotions. Often lost in thought, she would retreat to the garden or her room with her notebook, pouring her feelings into stories and drawings. Jonathan made a point to check on her regularly, offering encouragement and listening when she wanted to share. Naomi, ever the bookworm, began to take solace in reading aloud to her younger sisters. Jonathan noticed how her face lit up as she read bedtime stories to Layla and Alana, her soft voice bringing the words to life. The twins, Maya and Mia, were a constant source of both joy and mischief. They had a knack for finding trouble, whether it was climbing trees they weren't supposed to or turning the living room into a blanket fort. Jonathan often found himself torn between laughter and exasperation at their antics. As for Layla, the shy 5-year-old, she rarely spoke but clung to Jonathan whenever she felt unsure. And little Alana, just 3, followed her sisters around like a shadow, her big eyes soaking in everything around her. The struggles of grief. Despite the growing sense of normalcy, grief still lingered in the corners of their lives. Nightmares were common, especially for the younger girls. Jonathan often found himself woken in the middle of the night by the sound of soft crying. One such night, he found Layla curled up in a corner of her room, clutching a pillow to her chest. "I miss Mommy and Daddy," she whispered when Jonathan sat down beside her. "I missed them too," he said, pulling her into his arms. "But you know what? They love you so much, Layla. And they'd want you to remember all the happy times you had with them." She nodded against his chest, her tiny body trembling. "Do you think they can see us?" she asked, her voice small. Jonathan swallowed the lump in his throat. "I think they're watching over us," he said. "And I think they'd be proud of how strong you and your sisters are." The community's role. Meanwhile, the community remained divided in their opinions about Jonathan's decision. While some rallied around him, others expressed doubts about his ability to handle such a monumental task. At the church, whispers still circulated. Some congregants believed he was in over his head, while others admired his courage. Jonathan chose to focus on the positive, leaning on the support of those who offered it. One day, Mrs. Kemp, the church secretary, showed up at his house with a car full of donations. "Pastor," she said with a warm smile, "I thought you might need some extra supplies. Raising 7 kids isn't easy, but you're doing God's work, and we're here to help." Jonathan felt a wave of gratitude as he helped her unload boxes of clothes, toys, and pantry staples. "Thank you, Mrs. Kemp," he said. "I can't tell you how much this means to us." The first milestone. A few weeks later, Jonathan decided it was time for a family outing. A trip to the local park. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and the girls were buzzing with excitement as they packed a picnic basket. For many of them, it was their first outing since the tragedy. At the park, the girls ran and played, their laughter filling the air. Tamara helped Alana climb the playground equipment, while Naomi joined Jasmine in sketching the scenery. The twins raced each other across the grass, their competitive spirits shining through. Jonathan watched from a bench, a sense of contentment washing over him. For the first time in months, the girls looked genuinely happy. Later, as they sat together under a tree sharing sandwiches and juice, Tamara turned to Jonathan and said, "Thank you for bringing us here, Pastor." "You don't have to call me Pastor," he said with a smile. "You can call me Jonathan, or whatever you're comfortable with." Tamara hesitated, then said softly, "What about Dad?" Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. "If that's what you want," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded, and the other girls chimed in with agreement. From that day on, Pastor Jonathan became simply Dad, laying a foundation. That night, as Jonathan tucked each girl into bed, he felt a profound sense of purpose. This journey wasn't just about keeping a promise to his late friends. It was about building something new, something strong. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but in that moment, surrounded by the love of 7 little girls, Jonathan knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. A test of faith. The routine of their new life had settled in, but Pastor Jonathan Green knew it was only the beginning. Parenting 7 grieving, growing girls was no small feat, and while the days were filled with love and laughter, the nights often brought doubts that clung to him like shadows. Each day brought new challenges, and though he tried to remain steadfast in his faith, there were moments when the weight of his decision felt insurmountable. The struggle to keep up. Mornings in the Green household were a symphony of chaos. The twins, Maya and Mia, often argued about who got to wear what, while Naomi spent too much time immersed in a book instead of getting ready for school. Tamara, ever the responsible eldest sister, worked diligently to help Jonathan manage breakfast, but even her best efforts couldn't prevent the occasional spill of orange juice or burnt toast. "Layla, honey, where are your shoes?" Jonathan called out one particularly hectic morning, scanning the living room. "I don't know," came the small voice from behind the couch, where she was hiding with Alana. "Girls, if we don't leave in 5 minutes, you'll all be late," he exclaimed, his voice rising in mild frustration. Jasmine appeared in the doorway, holding a small handwritten note. "Dad," she said softly, "can I show you something?" Jonathan sighed, kneeling down to her level. "Of course, sweetheart, but can it wait until after school? We're running late." Jasmine's face fell, and she nodded, folding the note carefully and tucking it into her pocket. Guilt pricked Jonathan's heart, but before he could say more, the honk of the school bus outside sent the girls scrambling, balancing fatherhood and duty. After dropping the younger girls off, Jonathan headed to the church. His office, once a peaceful haven, now felt more like a battlefield of competing responsibilities. Sermon drafts, financial records, and Sunday school plans were piled on his desk, alongside notes from the school about parent-teacher conferences and upcoming field trips. As he sat down to work, Mrs. Kemp, the church secretary, knocked on the door and entered with her usual brisk efficiency. "Pastor, the deacon board wants to discuss next month's budget." Also, Mrs. Willow called again about her concerns over the Sunday choir. Jonathan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Thank you, Mrs. Kemp. I'll handle it." She paused, her sharp eyes softening. "Pastor," she said gently, "you look exhausted. Maybe you should take a break." "I can't afford to," he replied with a weary smile. "Not with everything going on. Even God rested on the seventh day," she reminded him before leaving the office. A community divided. While many in the community admired Jonathan's commitment to the girls, others continued to question his ability to manage. At a deacon board meeting that evening, one of the older members, Mr. Langston, voiced what others had been whispering. "Pastor," he began, clearing his throat, "we all respect what you've done for those girls. But some of us are concerned that your responsibilities at home might be interfering with your duties here." Jonathan stiffened. "I assure you, Mr. Langston, I'm fully committed to this church." Langston frowned. "Even so, we can't ignore the strain this is putting on you. Perhaps it's time to consider delegating more." Jonathan clenched his hands under the table, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. "I'll take your concerns into account," he said evenly, though inside, his confidence wavered. As the meeting adjourned, Mrs. Kemp caught his arm. "Don't let them get to you," she said quietly. "You're doing God's work, both at home and here." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mrs. Kemp. That means more than you know." The crisis. A few weeks later, the family faced their first major crisis. It was a Friday afternoon, and Jonathan had picked up the girls from school. As they piled into the house, their voices filled the air with stories of their day. Tamara was helping Alana out of her shoes when the phone rang. "Pastor Green." The voice on the other end said, "This is Principal Harris. I'm calling about Jasmine." Jonathan's heart sank. "Is everything okay?" "She's fine, but there was an incident at school. Jasmine got into a fight with another student. We'll need to discuss this in person on Monday." When Jonathan hung up, he found Jasmine sitting on the couch, her arms crossed and her face flushed with anger. "Jasmine," he said gently, sitting beside her, "what happened at school?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she refused to speak. It wasn't until Tamara stepped in that the story emerged. Another student had made a cruel comment about their parents, and Jasmine, usually so quiet and reserved, had lashed out in anger. Jonathan pulled her into a hug. "Sweetheart, I understand why you're upset, but fighting isn't the answer." "They don't know what it's like," Jasmine said, her voice trembling. "They don't know how much it hurts." "I know, baby," Jonathan said, his heart breaking. "But you can always come to me. We'll face it together." That night, after the younger girls had gone to bed, Jonathan sat with Jasmine in the living room. She handed him the note she had tried to show him earlier, a short letter addressed to her parents. "Dear Mom and Dad," it read, "I miss you every day. Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe without you, but Pastor Jonathan is taking good care of us. I think you'd be proud of him." Jonathan's vision blurred with tears as he read the words. "Jasmine," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you for sharing this with me. And thank you for trusting me." A turning point. The incident with Jasmine became a turning point for the family. It reminded Jonathan of the importance of prioritizing the girls' emotional well-being, even as he struggled to balance everything else. He began setting aside dedicated time for each of them, listening to their fears and dreams, and encouraging them to open up about their feelings. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, Tamara surprised him by saying, "You're doing a good job, Dad." The other girls chimed in, nodding and smiling. Jonathan felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thank you," he said, his voice wavering. "I couldn't do it without all of you." Faith renewed. That Sunday, as Jonathan stood at the pulpit, he delivered a sermon about perseverance and faith. Sometimes, God places mountains in our path, not to hinder us, but to show us how strong we can be when we climb them, he said, his eyes scanning the congregation. And when we reach the top, we find that we were never truly alone. God was with us every step of the way. As he spoke, he caught sight of his girls sitting in the front row. Tamara was holding Alana in her lap, and Jasmine was whispering something to Naomi that made her smile. The twins, as usual, were giggling about something, and Layla was quietly watching him with wide eyes. In that moment, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead were daunting, but he knew that with faith, love, and the support of his community, they could overcome anything. Building a legacy. As the months passed, Pastor Jonathan Green and his 7 adopted daughters began to find their rhythm. The chaos of adjusting to a new life had given way to a tenuous balance. The Green household was still a flurry of activity, but it was a joyful one, full of laughter, occasional arguments, and a growing sense of unity. However, while the family had made progress, Jonathan was keenly aware of the challenges that still lay ahead. Each of the girls carried their own grief, their own struggles, and their own dreams. And Jonathan, though steadfast in his love for them, often wondered if he was truly enough. Discovering hidden talents. One chilly autumn morning, Jonathan sat in the school gymnasium, nervously clutching a program for the annual talent showcase. It was the first event the girls had participated in as a family, and they had been buzzing with excitement for weeks. "Do you think the twins will remember their dance steps?" Jonathan whispered to Tamara, who sat beside him. She gave him a knowing smile. "They've been practicing every night, Dad. They'll be fine." The showcase began, and one by one, the acts performed. When it was time for Naomi to take the stage, Jonathan felt his heart swell with pride. She had written an original poem titled "A Place Called Home," a heartfelt piece about finding love and security after loss. As she recited the final lines, her voice steady and clear, the audience erupted into applause. Naomi's face lit up with a shy smile as she glanced toward Jonathan, who was clapping louder than anyone. Next were Maya and Mia, who performed a spirited dance routine to a pop song. Their energy was infectious, and by the end, the entire audience was cheering. Even little Alana, sitting in Jonathan's lap, clapped her tiny hands with glee. Later, Jasmine surprised everyone with a hauntingly beautiful piano piece she had composed herself. "I didn't even know she played," Jonathan whispered to Tamara, who grinned and shrugged. The night ended with the entire family being recognized for their participation, and Jonathan couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride. These weren't just his daughters. They were incredible young women, each with their own light to share with the world. Facing financial struggles, while the showcase was a high point, the practical realities of raising 7 children were never far from Jonathan's mind. The expenses were mounting: school supplies, clothing, food, and the countless other costs that came with parenting. Jonathan had taken on a second part-time job at the local bookstore, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Jonathan sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills. The numbers didn't add up, no matter how he arranged them. He bowed his head, praying for guidance. The next day, he was approached by Mrs. Kemp at the church. "Pastor, I know you're too proud to ask, but we've started a fundraiser for you and the girls," she said, handing him a flyer. Jonathan's initial instinct was to refuse. He didn't want to burden the congregation further. But as Mrs. Kemp reminded him, "This community loves you, Pastor. Let us help." The fundraiser, a combination of a bake sale and a charity auction, was a roaring success. The outpouring of support from the community left Jonathan humbled and grateful. For the first time in weeks, he felt a small measure of relief, a family bonding moment. On a rare day off, Jonathan decided to take the girls on a trip to the countryside. They packed sandwiches, fruit, and snacks, and piled into the church van. The drive was filled with music, laughter, and the occasional squabble over who got to sit where. When they arrived at a scenic lake surrounded by golden-leaf trees, the girls burst out of the van, their excitement palpable. Tamara and Jasmine helped Layla and Alana skip stones across the water, while Maya and Mia chased each other through the grass. Naomi, ever the observer, sat under a tree with her notebook, sketching the scene. Jonathan watched them from a distance, a deep sense of peace settling over him. Despite the challenges, moments like this reminded him why he had made the decision to adopt them. They were more than his responsibility. They were his family. As the sun began to set, they gathered around a small bonfire Jonathan had built. Tamara roasted marshmallows for the younger girls while Jasmine strummed a guitar she had brought along, singing softly. "Thank you for today, Dad," Tamara said, sitting beside him as the fire crackled. "We needed this." "So did I," Jonathan admitted with a smile. The test of resilience. Just as the family began to settle into a comfortable routine, life threw another curveball. One afternoon, Jonathan received a call from Alana's preschool teacher. "Pastor Green," she began hesitantly, "I think Alana might be struggling more than we realized. She's been unusually withdrawn and hasn't been interacting with the other children." Jonathan's heart sank. He had known Alana was the most fragile of the girls, but he had hoped the stability of their new life would help her heal. That evening, he sat down with Tamara to discuss it. "Alana doesn't talk about Mom and Dad much," Tamara said. "Maybe she's holding it all inside." Determined to help, Jonathan began spending more one-on-one time with Alana. They took walks together, read picture books, and painted colorful scenes on canvases. Slowly but surely, Alana began to open up. One night, as Jonathan tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Daddy." The word caught him off guard. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Mommy and Daddy miss me too?" Jonathan swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "I think they miss you every single day," he said, stroking her hair. "But they're so proud of you, Alana. And they're so glad you have all of us to love you." She hugged him tightly, her small arms around his neck. For the first time, Jonathan felt like he was truly reaching her. A community recognizes their strength. As the family continued to grow and heal, their story began to inspire others in the community. At a town meeting, Mayor Richardson stood to recognize Jonathan and the girls. Pastor Green's decision to adopt these 7 remarkable young ladies has reminded us all of the power of love, faith, and community, the mayor said. They are an example of what it means to come together in the face of adversity. The room erupted in applause, and Jonathan, though humbled, made sure to shift the spotlight to the girls. "They're the real heroes," he said. "Their strength and courage inspire me every day. The legacy of love." By the end of the year, the Green household was a bustling hub of activity and love. Tamara excelled in school and began mentoring younger students. Jasmine's musical talents flourished, and she started performing at community events. Naomi won a regional poetry contest, and Maya and Mia became star athletes on their school's soccer team. Layla, once shy and reserved, began making friends, and Alana's laughter filled the house once more. One evening, as they sat around the dining table sharing stories from their day, Tamara raised her glass of lemonade. "To Dad," she said, smiling, "for never giving up on us." The other girls joined in, their voices echoing in unison. "To Dad." Jonathan raised his glass, his heart full. "To us," he said, "for proving that family is what we make it." Strength in the storm. As life in the Green household gained momentum, Pastor Jonathan Green began to notice the subtle ways in which each of the girls started to blossom. Their laughter grew more frequent, their confidence more evident. Yet the road to healing was far from complete, and the challenges they faced together would soon remind them of the depth of their bond. Jasmine's unexpected surprise. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jasmine approached Jonathan with a request that left him both surprised and proud. "Dad, can I join the school music club?" she asked hesitantly, holding a flyer in her hands. "They need someone to compose music for the spring showcase." Jonathan smiled warmly. "Of course, sweetheart. You've got a real talent for music. I think it's a wonderful idea." Jasmine's face lit up, but her excitement was tinged with worry. "What if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough?" "You won't know unless you try," Jonathan said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And even if it doesn't go as planned, you'll learn something valuable. I'm proud of you for wanting to try." Jasmine nodded, her confidence bolstered. Over the next few weeks, she poured herself into her compositions, often staying up late scribbling notes in her music journal. Jonathan made it a point to check in on her progress, offering encouragement and occasionally bringing her a cup of tea when she looked tired. The breaking point. As the years unfolded, the Green family became a symbol of resilience and love within their community. The girls were thriving in their own ways, and Jonathan was finally beginning to feel like he had a handle on the many moving parts of their lives. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and the Green household was no exception. An unforeseen financial crisis. One cold January morning, Jonathan sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills spread out before him. The heating bill was higher than expected, and a series of unexpected car repairs had drained his modest savings. Despite the community's generosity, raising 7 daughters on a pastor's salary had always been a delicate balancing act. Tamara, now 16 and perceptive as ever, noticed the strain on his face. "Dad," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "is everything okay?" Jonathan mustered a smile. "Just the usual grown-up stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But Tamara wasn't convinced. That evening, she called a family meeting, insisting that they all pitch in to help. "We're a team," she told her sisters. "If Dad's struggling, it's our job to step up." The girls brainstormed ways to contribute. Jasmine offered to give piano lessons to younger children in the neighborhood. Maya and Mia suggested starting a weekend dog walking service. Even little Alana volunteered to help by selling homemade bracelets to her classmates. Jonathan, moved by their determination, insisted they didn't need to take on such responsibilities. "Your job is to focus on being kids," he said. But Tamara, ever the leader, replied firmly, "We're your kids, Dad. And that means helping when it matters." A threat to their home. As if the financial strain wasn't enough, an unexpected blow arrived in the form of a letter from the bank. Jonathan had fallen behind on the mortgage, and unless he could come up with the overdue payments, their home would be at risk. Panic gripped him as he read the notice. This house wasn't just a roof over their heads. It was their sanctuary, the place where they had built their lives together. Losing it was unthinkable. He turned to Mrs. Kemp for advice. "The church is here to help, Pastor," she assured him. "We'll figure something out." But Jonathan, ever the humble man, struggled with the idea of accepting more aid. "I don't want to be a burden," he said quietly. "Nonsense," Mrs. Kemp replied firmly. "You've given everything to this community. Now it's our turn to give back." The community rallies. Word of Jonathan's struggles spread through the town, and the response was overwhelming. Members of the congregation organized a fundraiser, while local businesses donated proceeds from sales to help the Green family. A group of volunteers even showed up at the house to make minor repairs, ensuring the home was in good condition. The girls, initially embarrassed by the attention, soon realized how deeply their story had touched the community. Jasmine wrote a heartfelt thank you song, which she performed at a special church service. Naomi, inspired by the outpouring of support, wrote an essay about the meaning of family, which was published in the local newspaper. A rift among the sisters. Amidst the crisis, tension began to brew within the family. Tamara, feeling the weight of responsibility as the eldest, became increasingly frustrated with her sisters when they didn't meet her high standards. "You can't just leave your stuff everywhere, Maya," she snapped one evening. "And Mia, you were supposed to help with dinner, not disappear into your room." Maya and Mia fired back, accusing Tamara of being bossy. The argument escalated until Jonathan had to step in. "Enough," he said, his voice firm but calm. "We're all under a lot of pressure right now, but we need to support each other, not tear each other down." The girls fell silent, guilt evident on their faces. Later that night, Tamara came to Jonathan in tears. "I just want to help, Dad," she said. "I don't want to let you down." Jonathan pulled her into a hug. "You could never let me down, Tamara. You're doing more than I could ever ask for, but you don't have to carry this alone." An unexpected ally. During this turbulent time, an unexpected ally emerged. Mr. Langston, the same deacon who had once questioned Jonathan's decision to adopt the girls. He approached Jonathan after a Sunday service, his demeanor uncharacteristically warm. "Pastor," he began, "I owe you an apology. I doubted you when you took in those girls, but you've proven me wrong in every way." Jonathan, taken aback, thanked him quietly. And Mr. Langston continued, "I'd like to help. My brother owns a construction company, and he's looking for part-time help. It's not much, but it might help you make ends meet." Jonathan hesitated. Balancing another job with his pastoral duties and parenting seemed daunting, but ultimately accepted. The extra income, though modest, made a significant difference. A turning point. As the family worked through their struggles, they began to draw closer than ever. One evening, after a particularly long day, Jonathan gathered the girls in the living room. "I want you all to know how proud I am of you," he said. "This hasn't been easy, but seeing how you've all come together reminds me of why I made the decision to adopt you in the first place." Tamara smiled. "Because we're worth it." Jonathan chuckled. "Exactly." Naomi, holding Alana on her lap, added, "And because you love us." "More than anything," Jonathan said, his voice filled with emotion. "A gift of gratitude." A few weeks later, the girls surprised Jonathan with a gift, a handmade scrapbook filled with photos, letters, and drawings. Each page told a story of their journey together, from the early days of uncertainty to the moments of joy and triumph. "Dad," Tamara said as she handed him the book, "this is our way of saying thank you for everything." Jonathan flipped through the pages, tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve this," he said softly. "Yes, you do," Jasmine replied, "because you're the best dad we could ever ask for." Rebuilding together. With the community's help, Jonathan managed to get the mortgage back on track, and the family began to rebuild their sense of stability. The girls, inspired by the kindness they had received, started volunteering at the church and local shelters, eager to pay the generosity forward. Their story, once marked by loss, had become a testament to the power of love and resilience. And though the challenges would never completely disappear, they faced the future with renewed hope, together. A legacy of love. Years had passed since Pastor Jonathan Green had made the life-altering decision to adopt 7 orphan girls. The once chaotic, grief-stricken household had transformed into a warm, bustling home filled with love, laughter, and purpose. Each of the girls, now older and more independent, had begun carving out their own paths in life. Yet their bond as a family remained unshakable, a testament to the foundation of love and faith Jonathan had worked so hard to build. The flourishing of dreams. Tamara, now 21, had just completed her second year of college, where she was studying to become a social worker. Her experience growing up with Jonathan and her sisters had ignited a passion for helping children in foster care. During her summer break, she organized a workshop at the church to educate the community about the foster system and the importance of keeping siblings together. At the end of one of her presentations, she looked out at the audience, her eyes scanning for Jonathan. When she found him sitting in the front row, she smiled warmly. "I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for my dad," she said. "He taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about love and commitment. I hope to give that same love to kids who need it." Jonathan blinked back tears as the room erupted into applause. He could see the fire in her eyes, a determination born from the trials they had faced together. Jasmine, now 19, had turned her love for music into a scholarship at a prestigious conservatory. Her original compositions, inspired by the family's journey, had won awards and touched the hearts of many. On weekends, she returned home to teach music lessons to underprivileged children at the church. "Dad," she said one afternoon as they sat in the living room, her fingers idly plucking the strings of her guitar, "one of my students told me she feels like she has a voice now because of music. That's what you gave me, a voice when I didn't think I had one." Jonathan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "And look at how far your voice has carried you," he said. "The world is better for hearing it." Maya and Mia, a dynamic duo. The twins, Maya and Mia, had blossomed into unstoppable forces on their high school soccer team. Their bond, once marked by mischief, had evolved into a partnership that was the envy of their peers. They had led their team to back-to-back state championships, earning scholarships to play college soccer together. "Dad, did you see that goal?" Maya exclaimed after one particularly thrilling game. "I saw every second of it," Jonathan replied, laughing as he hugged both girls. "I don't know how you two do it, but you make it look easy." "It's because we're a team," Maya said, grinning. "Just like this family." Their successes weren't confined to the soccer field. Both girls had started mentoring younger athletes, teaching them not just the game, but also the importance of teamwork and perseverance. Naomi's literary ambitions. Naomi, now 17, had developed a love for storytelling that rivaled her love for reading. She had written and published her first book, a collection of poems and short stories inspired by her journey of healing and growth. The book, A Place Called Home, quickly gained attention, with proceeds going to organizations supporting foster children. At her book launch, Naomi invited Jonathan to say a few words. Nervous but proud, he stood in front of the crowd, holding her book in his hands. "Naomi has always had a way with words," he began. "And through those words, she's given a voice to a journey that's been both painful and beautiful. Her book is a testament to the power of resilience, the strength of family, and the importance of hope." Naomi, sitting in the front row, wiped away tears as the audience applauded. Layla and Alana's blossoming confidence. Layla, once the shyest of the sisters, had become an advocate for children's mental health at her middle school. She organized peer support groups and even spoke at local events about the importance of addressing grief and finding healthy ways to cope. "I never thought I could talk in front of people," she told Jonathan one evening. "But when I see how much it helps others, it's worth it." Jonathan beamed. "You're braver than you think, Layla." "I've always known that." Alana, now 10, was the youngest but no less remarkable. Her once timid demeanor had been replaced by a bright, bubbly personality. She excelled in art, often painting vivid scenes of their family's life together. One of her paintings, titled "The House That Love Built," won first place in a statewide competition. "Do you like it, Dad?" Alana asked as she presented the painting to Jonathan. He gazed at the artwork, which depicted their home surrounded by colorful, intertwined branches symbolizing their family. "I don't just like it, sweetheart," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I love it, just like I love you." The community's recognition. As the girls flourished, so too did the Green family's reputation in the community. The church, once a modest gathering place, had become a beacon of hope and inspiration for many. Jonathan's sermons, often woven with stories of his family's journey, drew larger and more diverse crowds than ever before. One Sunday, after a particularly moving service, the mayor approached Jonathan with a proposal. "Pastor Green," he said, "your story has touched so many lives. We'd like to honor your family by naming the community center after you." Jonathan was stunned. "I'm deeply honored," he said, "but this isn't just about me. It's about my daughters and the love that brought us together." The dedication ceremony, held a few months later, was attended by hundreds of people. Each of the girls spoke, sharing their perspectives on what family and community meant to them. By the end of the event, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. A new chapter. As the Green family stood on the threshold of a new chapter, Jonathan reflected on how far they had come. The challenges they had faced, financial struggles, grief, and doubt, had forged them into a family whose bond was unbreakable. One evening, as they all gathered around the dining table for dinner, Tamara raised her glass. "To Dad," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "for giving us a second chance at life, for teaching us that love is what makes a family." The other girls raised their glasses, echoing her words. Jonathan, his eyes glistening with tears, raised his own. "To all of you," he said, "for proving that no challenge is too great when faced with love and faith." As laughter and chatter filled the room, Jonathan felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was his legacy, a family built on hope, resilience, and unwavering love. And as the girls continued to grow and inspire others, he knew that their story was far from over. It was just the beginning.